Alright, guys, welcome to my video series, lecture series on the Greek literature of the 20th century. Today I'm going to be talking about Archetypes and the Collective Unconscious by Carl Jung. Um, this is part one of his collective works in volume 9, and later in another episode we'll be talking about part 2, which is called Ion, one of the scariest books I've ever read in my life. So who was Carl Jung? Carl Gustav Jung was a Swiss psychiatrist and a psychoanalyst who founded analytical psychology. Jung's work was mostly influenced by Sigmund Freud, and he was a student of Friedrich Nietzsche. Now, you might know Nietzsche as being a German philosopher who claimed that God was dead. Very interesting stuff. Um, I'll talk later about Friedrich Nietzsche in a later episode for sure. I want to get into him. So at the start of this book, it starts off with a picture of a mandala of a modern man. And a mandala is a graphical representation of the center, the self, the Jungian self. It can appear in dreams and visions, or it can be created spontaneously by drawing. It is present in the cultural and religious representations. Examples of mandalas can be found in all ancient cultures. We find it in Christianity under the form of frescoes with animal images representing apostles and the zodiac. The astrological zodiac and its versions are examples of mandalas. Also, in the Indian spiritual practices, we find fascinating examples of mandalas with symbols of the local pantheon. In yoga practices, mandalas can be a support for meditation or an image that must be internalized through mental absorption. This image organizes the inner energies and forces of the practitioner and puts them in relationship with his ego consciousness. Generally speaking, a mandala is a geometrical form, a square or a circle, abstract and static, or a vivid image formed of objects and or beings. In our dreams, the mandala indicates the phenomenon of centering of the ego in relationship with the psychic wholeness. It is part of the individuation process, as described by Jung in his works. Sorry if my speaking is a bit off. This is my first video, so I'll try and use this as practice as I get later into the lecture series. Um, we'll start off with chapter 1, Archetypes of the Collective Unconscious. What is in this book? So first we need to know what an archetype is. An archetype is a universal, archaic symbol, an image that derives from the collective unconscious. They are the psychic counterparts of instincts. Example, the imago Dei, the God image, is a reflection of the archetype in the human spirit. Now, the collective unconscious is the objective psyche. It refers to the idea that a segment of the deepest unconscious mind is genetically inherited. It is not shaped by personal experience. So here is a picture of the Imago Dei. This is a painting by Michelangelo called The Creation of Adam. And the Imago Dei is the truth that we are all created in the image and likeness of God. It gives common cause to battling racism and malevolence. Our human dignity alone demands respect for all human life. Connected, it connects to the legal system. So we take in our Western legal system, we don't just throw anybody into jail just on any baseless claim. Perhaps if they did commit a murder, they're still tried in a fair, just way. Doesn't always seem to be that way, but we try and um, pertain to the image that we are all made in one image, God's image, and that we all have a divine presence to us. That's why we don't kill each other just for no reason, right? Now I do want to show you guys this video here. It's why racism is an imago Dei, a God image. And I'll show you guys this video. It does touch on Christianity, and Christianity is a pretty present topic when we're talking about Carl Jung. Carl Jung described Christianity as Western's logos. We understand it as logos, so it is something that where we derive all of our values from. It's not as abstract as you might think. And take out all the metaphysical properties of what God is. You don't have to think of him as a man in the sky. You could think of God as your highest ideal. And Sam Harris talks about how human beings don't necessarily need God. It's a fair argument. I don't want to get too much into it. If you're into Sam Harris, you might understand what I'm talking about. So I'll play that video.
When you hear about racism, usually you're going to hear a lot of other terms kind of attached to it, like systemic injustice. You're going to hear calls for education reform. I don't want to say that those things aren't true and that they don't need to be addressed, but I do want to point out that I think that those are symptomatic of really a greater issue. And so really, for just a minute or two here, I want to just kind of say that I believe that one of the things the church could do that would give us really a head start on tackling the mess that we see out there right now is a robust understanding of what we mean when we talk about the imago Dei, or being made in the image of God. So what we believe as Christians, because we believe what the Bible teaches, is that all humankind is made in the image of God. We have a higher value than anything in all of creation, and all of humankind is made equal in dignity, value, and worth. And so when we would kind of grab hold of that vision of humankind and live in such a way that we're showing in how we live our lives, in our friendships, and who we're having around our dinner table, and what we're striving to help our churches look like, images and mirrors the intuitive or intrinsic value of all humankind, right? Rather, color, gender, we're showing, no. God values this. God loves this. When we can do that, have a robust understanding and practice of the imago Dei, I think the church becomes really something the world can look at as a solution to its ills around racism and the brokenness that exists between the ethnicities.
So yeah, we can see in that video that he's touching on topics about how if we all, as a society, um, made a collective or had a collective individual responsibility, each of us, and it came out as a group in society, that if we all formed an image of the Imago Dei and understood the elements that make us divine, we would be able to overcome racism. It's a complicated topic, but I think it could work. Here in this slide is a deck of tarot cards, and in these tarot cards you can see some of the archetypes, like the magician and the fool or the trickster. And here we have a quote by Carl Jung, and it says, "Art intuitively apprehends coming changes in the collective unconscious." So yeah, this is where we get the idea that we have this psychic phenomenology where we can predict the future, and it could work in a sense if you don't project situations onto the cards. I don't think they work in that sense. I think that you could come to an understanding just by looking at the archetypes in movies, Disney movies. We'll get into that later on in the episode. But yeah, let's get to the next slide. Jung's model of the psyche. So Jung believed that the psyche is a self-regulating system, rather like the body, one that seeks to maintain a balance between opposing qualities while constantly striving for growth, a process Jung called individuation. So here we have the picture here. We have the ego. So this is where you are, this dot right now. Everything you see right now, that's your ego, everything you're perceiving and thinking about, what you're conscious, it's in consciousness here. And then we have the shadow, and I'll get into that in the next slide. And that would be a part of our unconscious and the collective unconscious. And then we have our persona. This is our mask that we wear in society, how we want other people to see us, how other people perceive us. And it is part of our consciousness. Personal, personal, yeah. So now we have the animus and the anima. These are both in the unconscious and the collective unconscious. I'll get to that in a bit. And then we have the outer world and the inner world. So you can take a look at this graph to try and understand what I'm talking about. To understand Jung, you kind of have to look at pictures a lot. That's what I realized. So I'll just describe what each section is. So the first section, ego. According to Jung, the ego represents the conscious mind, as it compromises the thoughts, memories, and emotions a person is aware of. The ego is largely responsible for feelings of identity and continuity, conscious. Then we have the shadow. The shadow is either an unconscious aspect of the personality that the conscious ego does not identify in itself, or the entirety of the unconscious. Example, everything of which a person is not fully conscious of. In short, the shadow is the unknown side. And if you've seen the movie Fight Club, you might understand this. You have the split off of personality, kind of everything that you tuck away, like your instincts and the things that you're not proud of, you kind of tuck away but into your unconscious. It's kind of like projected as a shadow because you can't really see it, but it's there and it controls part of your life. Then we have the persona, the social face the individual presents to the world, a kind of mask designed, on the one hand, to make a definite impression upon others, and on others to conceal the true nature of the individual. And this is conscious. We're conscious of this. The anima and the animus. So, Jung described the animus as the unconscious masculine side of a woman, and the anima as the unconscious feminine side of a man, each transcending the personal psyche. This is part of our unconscious. Go to the next slide here. The shadow. It is a frightening thought that man also has a shadow to him, consisting not just of little weakness and foibles, bleh, but of positively demonic Dionysium. The shadow is a living part of the personality, and therefore wants to live with it in some form. It cannot be argued out of existence or rationalized into harmlessness. This problem is exceedingly difficult because it not only challenges the whole man, but reminds him at the same time his helplessness and ineffectuality. So the shadow, it's the dark side of our unconscious. I want to relate this to some sources. And as you know, in the 20th century, we had plenty of disasters. Um, for instance, we had the Holocaust. Um, there was a picture I saw on Google of the Einsatzgruppen, a German deployment group. There were death squads of Nazi Germany that were responsible for mass killings, primarily by shooting during World War II. Um, it was a disturbing image, I will say. I don't want to put it up on the screen, but you can imagine uh, thousands, hundreds of bodies just laid out on the floor, dead, and pretty much these soldiers were given commands like shoot them. And I listen to a lot of Jordan Peterson, and what he talks about is um, the benefits of realizing that you might have been capable of committing heinous crimes, and that if you were in a position of being a guard in Auschwitz, that you would commit the same crimes. And to come to that understanding is very scary, but it comes with a lot of benefits to your psyche, because as we know, opposites, you can't be entirely good without knowing your negative aspects. That's why God says, the meek shall inherit the earth, right? The people with swords, but keep them sheathed, will inherit the earth. So you have to know what you're capable of, and I think young men need to know that in this day and age. Also, it wasn't just on the alt right. We had tremendous problems on the radical left side too. Mass graves in the Soviet Union were used for the burial of mass numbers of citizens and foreigners executed by the government of the Soviet Union under Joseph Stalin. These mass killings were carried out by the security organizations such as the NKVD and reached their peak in the Great Purge of 1937 to 38. 20 million people were killed. I do want to pause here because my battery is going to die, but I will get that charged up and I'll be right back. So now we're going to get into the next part, the anima. What is the anima? The inner feminine side of a man. The anima is both a personal complex and an archetypal image of a woman in the male psyche. So if you think about archetypes, these are symbols or pretty much the gods of our unconscious, per se. So these um, complexes um, work, they, how do I describe this? It's very complicated stuff to understand. So you're pretty much oriented in the world, and everything you see is what you're conscious of. So we have archetypal complexes that are affecting how we perceive the world. They put out projections that we might not be aware of. So in this case, the anima would be everything that a man is not, the feminine side of a man. So we see this as a woman often in our dreams, and we project this image onto women that we see in society. So there is in a man, an imago, not only of the mother, but of the daughter, the sister, the beloved, the heavenly goddess, and the chthonic babu. Every mother and every beloved is forced to become the carrier and embodiment of this omnipresent and ageless image, which corresponds to the deepest reality in a man. It belongs to him, this peerless image of a woman. She stands for the loyalty which, in the interest of life, he must sometimes forego. She is the much needed compensation for the risks, struggles, sacrifices that all end in disappointment. She is the solace for all the bitterness of life. So, what we can see is as men grow up, the first half of their life, they're trying as much as possible to become a man. They want to escape their mothers. That is the biggest goal to them. After the middle of life, however, permanent loss of the anima means a diminution of vitality, of flexibility, and of human kindness. So, in essence, we pretty much establish um, all of our ideals of what a woman should be from our mother. And later, as we leave our house and go out into the world, our image of women change from meeting women in society. And it changes from the image of a compassionate woman that doesn't want any harm to you to a very judging force. So you see, women, as we know, reject men, and I'll give you a statistic. So um, we have double the amount of female ancestors than we do males, and that is because if you are given, let's say, two men, and out of every two men, one of them has one child and the other has zero. And you have two women, both of them average two um, babies. So, as you can see, there's a statistical difference in how men and women interact in the world because women are an essential part to sexual selection. So, as you might know, that might give men a lot of insecurity when it comes to women because they're constantly being judged. Yeah, you're good as a friend, but are you uh, capable of sustaining a child? Maybe not. And again, maybe so. I think if you understand these concepts, it will help you in understanding um, why women see you as they do. Because um, the woman projects an animus onto you, and that's everything a man should be. So that pretty much comes down to um, being a leader, forming arguments, taking assertive roles in society. And there's there's positive sides and there's negative sides to both the anima and the animus. So in the male, we have an anima could possess the male, so they become a soft boy. They're too comfortable in emotions, secondary emotions, right? So when they're confronted with things that they don't understand or they go out in their world, they succumb to the temptations of these emotions and they act very weak in the presence of the unknown life. And the same happens to women, except it happens with their animus. They become animus possessed. They argue for the sake of arguing. With these type of women, should refrain from even trying to argue because if you do, um, they win. And I'll show you guys a video of what this might look like. Um, it's a video. Uh, this is the lady. I don't know if you guys saw the humongous video, but this feminine lady, she's animus possessed. Her name is Zarna Joshi. All of her opinions are very ideologically possessed. It's almost like if as if you're not really talking to her. You're talking to an idea that she constructed from society that the patriarchy is corrupted, and you might find this with a lot of women nowadays, especially women that um, denounce men as being uh, what is the word? Men are stupid or something like that. It's almost like a rejection of what men should be. That they're not allowed to form an ideal and go out in society and try to conquer the world. That they should just refrain from doing any sort of dominating roles. And I could see a lot of problems with that because men, as children, we kind of like to. We're still kind of childs in the sense that we like to play with things and conquer them, while as women like to. I think their biggest goal in life would be to have children, and with men, it's kind of just to be the child in the sense that you play with things, you go on the world, you go into the world, you conquer them, and you become a warrior. So here, I'll show you guys this video. I think it's very interesting. It's very annoying too, so you guys can check that out.
People like to talk about how crime has gone up in Seattle, and they're right. Crime has gone up. The crimes of racist thug cops have gone up. Their crimes against women have gone up. Their crimes against people of color have gone up. And the crimes of racist, token, people of color politicians have gone up. Yeah, we noticed, Lorena Gonzalez. We noticed. We noticed how, after I spoke publicly against you, the cops sent racist, white supremacist rapists after me on BlueLivesMatter.com. We saw that, we noticed, and we all know how in cahoots with the cops you are. We know, we noticed how in cahoots Deborah Fares is with the cops, who's so disgusting and such a token that she won't even look at the people when they speak. We all noticed how bullies like Bruce Harrell, who speak publicly and interrupt women when they speak, just as you interrupt me now. We saw how those crimes went up. We saw how the disgust and contempt that you have towards the people has gone up. We saw all of this. And don't touch me. Don't touch me. Don't touch me. This is public comment. It is my right to speak.
That's her right to speak. That is her right to say.
Don't touch me. Don't touch me.
America.
This is America. This is America. This is America.
This is America. This.
All right, so as you can see in this video, from that video, she seemed to be very possessed by ideas, and to protect yourself from ideological possession when you encounter political speech that doesn't mention your responsibilities, stop listening. If something is being offered to you which doesn't come along with equivalent cost, there's something being hidden from you. That's a quote from Jordan B. Peterson. And I will say that throughout this video, you'll notice that she's kind of basing all of her arguments on a structure that she already had in the back of her head. It's almost as if you could see right through her, what she's saying, because you can pretty much predict everything she's going to say based on a particular idea, and that idea being that the patriarchy is corrupt and that men should be condemned for being participants in this patriarchy that oppresses women. So Jung felt that traditional religions could provide an adequate means to the infinite, where the believers still maintain a vital participation with faith. David Foster Wallace agreed with Jung that traditional religions or value systems were a good place to look for meaning. He cautioned that worshiping the wrong thing can have dire consequences. The compelling reason for maybe choosing some sort of God or spiritual type thing to worship, be it Jesus Christ or Allah, be it Yahweh or the Wiccan Mother Goddess, or the Four Noble Truths, or some inviolable set of ethical principles, is that pretty much anything else you worship will eat you alive. That being said, in order to avoid these type of situations, is when a woman starts or you notice a woman that is animus possessed, or someone that is speaking a lot of ideological opinions, You want to avoid arguing with them. Be very rational when it comes to commenting of what they have to say, because they can make you seem as if your opinion doesn't matter, and that there's no equilibrated sense for communication on both sides. All right. So next chapter, I want to talk about the psychological aspects of the mother archetype. I'll give you a definition of the mother complex. A group of feeling toned ideas associated with the experience and image of mother. So the mother complex is a potentially active component of everyone's psyche. First of all, by experience of the personal mother, then by significant contact with other women. Sometimes, or in homosexuality, the son's entire heterosexuality is tied to the mother in an unconscious form. In Don Juanism, he unconsciously seeks his mother in every woman he meets. So that could be a problem pertaining to young men, where we leave the house and we're immediately wanting to find a woman that can have those compassionate elements that our mother had or gave to us as a kid. And that could be a problem, especially when you're relating to other women, because other women have psychological components to them and complexes that pertain to um, masculine ways of thinking and feminine ways of thinking that are not entirely mother oriented, so not really based in feeling. So you have to be well integrated and understand all of these different complexes when you want to establish yourself in a relationship, or else that relationship will turn into a disaster. So pretty much you want to be well educated and understand these archetypes. And the reason why I'm making this video is because I find that understanding these archetypes can play a positive role in how you um, participate in society. And even in work, you'll be able to maintain certain standpoints a lot better by understanding these different complexes, because you'll be able to understand why people say the things they do, and you'll have reasons to believe that they might be possessed by different complexes that you might that they might not be aware of. So take that for don't take that for granted, and understand with complete humility that this is how the human psyche works. And that being said, I'll go to the next chapter, or the next slide. I do want to show you guys this video. It's a video from Disney's. It's a clip from Disney's Fantasia. It it articulates the mother nature, the positive aspects of the mother complex very well. In the video, you'll see a deer, and he kind of breathes this. He's kind of walking through water, which is the unconscious, and then he kind of breathes this air, and that air is called the pneuma. And in ancient Greece, that word mean for breath is in a religious context means spirit or soul. So as a man, you kind of go out into, or as an individual, you go out into the world and you speak truth. And when you speak truth, you're able to manifest uh, creation and new things, and that's what the mother existentially um, means. Creation brings about creation and new things, right? Women have the amazing gift of birth, right? So, but I do want to say that there is also negative aspects to the mother nature and the mother complex, as you'll see in my next slide. All right, so as you guys can see, that the mother also is the thing that brings about this chaotic element, right? You see the rising phoenix in burning fire, right? So that's pretty much the idea of rebirth, and I'll get to that in the next chapter. I will discuss a few ideas. Chaos is a creative energy, which is conceptually aligned with both fertility and death. Chaos can also be destructive and consuming. The Hindu goddess Kali embodies these archetypes. She is both the devouring mother and the nurturing mother, that from which we emerge, that which we return to. Chaos is rich with both opportunity and danger. So that brings me to the idea of the devouring, eatable mother. So the devouring mother is one of the four aspects of the mother archetype identified by Jung. The archetype is one of a mother archetype who selfishly loves her children rather than selflessly, as would be better for them. She does so out of a sense of protecting them from the real world. So you might find that maybe if you're a young man that you're trying to go out into the world, confront unknown, bring about change, bring about creativity and opportunity, and you might find your mom really does not like that idea because she wants to protect you from these from the dangers of the world. You don't want to get caught up in staying at your mother's house for too long, something that I'm trying to avoid for sure. And yeah, that's pretty much where that idea comes from. So with the idea of the phoenix, that kind of relates to the next chapter concerning rebirth. I'll talk about what rebirth is. So rebirth is a process experienced as a renewal or transformation of the personality. Um, it's in essence what Jung calls the individuation process. Rebirth is not a process that we can in any way observe. We can neither measure nor weigh nor photograph it. It is entirely beyond sense perception. One speaks of rebirth um, as being distinguished between five different forms. The first form, metempsychosis, transmigration of souls. The second one, reincarnation in a human body. Third one, resurrection. Fourth one, psychological rebirth or individuation. And indirect changes that come about through participation in the process of transformation. And I'll talk about this some more in the next slide. So psychological rebirth was Jung's particular particular focus, induced by ritual or stimulated by immediate personal experience. It results in an enlargement of the personality. He acknowledged that one might feel transformed during certain group experiences, but he cautioned against confusing this with genuine rebirth. So the idea of forming these social justice groups, and that's where people get really confused because they might feel as if they're transcending a new ideal, or but they're not really doing that, because what they're actually doing is formulating an idea and being possessed by it. In that sense, they're not really forming their own um, uh, conclusions based on actual truths. They're just trying to see in the world through a projected image of their of unconscious. Well, they might be conscious of it, but most people aren't conscious that they're doing this. Um, so I'd say if you're going into these social or the humanities in the universities, to be very very careful about being um, assimilated into a collective idea like socialism, or any idea that I think that these type of ideas are pretty dangerous, especially when you um, are participating in with them in a group, because there isn't really any group responsibility. I mean, there's a lot of group rights, but where is the group responsibility? It's hard to establish where responsibility lies within a group. So I think you guys should focus on being individuals first, and once you set your house in order, you'll be able to set your family in order. You'll be able to set society in order. It all starts with you making the effort to consciously um, um, go about the world in a way that is noble. And I'll touch with on that in the next slide. So if any considerable group of persons are united and identified with one another by a particular frame of mind, the resultant transformation experience bears only a very remote resemblance to the experience of individual transformation. A group experience takes place on a lower level of consciousness than the experience of an individual. This is due to the fact that when many people gather together to share one common emotion, the total psyche emerging from the group is below the level of the individual psyche. If it is a very large group, the collective psyche will be more like the psyche of an animal, right? So you're transgressing to a lower state of consciousness, a very primitive one. This is tribalism in essence. So yeah, be aware that you're not getting pushed into these type of ideological ideas or groups. So the group experience goes no deeper than the level of one's own mind in that state. It does work a change in you, but the change does not last. So Jung talks about the subjective transformation in this chapter. I will talk about the 8 different subjective transformations and give a definition of each. Um, the first one, A, diminution of personality. An example of the alteration of personality in the sense of diminution is furnished by what is known in primitive psychology as the loss of soul. The peculiar condition covered by this term is accounted for in the mind of the primitive by the supposition that a soul has gone off, just like its dog that runs away from his master overnight. It is then the task of the medicine man to fetch the fugitive back. Often the loss occurs suddenly and manifests itself in general malaise. B. Enlargement of personality. The personality is seldom in the beginning what it will be later on. For this reason, the possibility of enlarging it exists, at least during the first half of life. The enlargement may be effected through an accretion from without by new vital contents, finding their way into the personality from the outside and being assimilated. In this way, a considerable increase of personality may be experienced. We therefore tend to assume that this increase comes only from without, thus justifying the prejudice that one becomes a personality by stuffing into oneself as much as possible from outside. Self-explanatory? Not really. I'll try and touch on this a bit more. I'll read through the next one. C. Change of internal structure. We now come to change a personality which imply neither enlargement nor diminution, but a structural alteration. One of the most important forms is the phenomenon of possession. Some content, an idea, or a part of the personality obtains mastery of the individual for one reason or another. The contents which thus take possession appear as peculiar convictions, idiosyncrasies, stubborn plans, and so far forth. As a rule, they are not open to correction. So, right, this is what I was talking about. Join a political group, going and rioting in the streets, going and breaking stuff. Not a good idea. Identification with the group. We shall not, Young quotes, we shall now discuss another form of transformation experience, which I would call identification with the group. More accurately speaking, it is the identification of an individual with a number of people who as a group have collective experience of transformation. This special psychological situation must not be confused with participation in the transformation rite, which, through performed before an audience, does not in any way depend upon group identity or necessarily give rise to it. So this could be joining a religious group, not necessarily the magical rite itself, but you're participating in transformation through collective experience rather than the some type of overlaying magical ritual. Next, E. identification with a cult hero. Another important identification underlying the transformation experience is that with the god or hero who is transformed in the sacred ritual, many cult ceremonies are expressly identified. Where did I go? Sorry. Expressly Many cult many cult ceremonies are expressly intended to bring this identity about. An obvious example being the metamorphosis of Apuleius. Thus, the initiate, an ordinary human being, is elected to the Helios. He is crowned with a crown of palms and clad in the mystic mantle, whereupon the assembled crowd pays homage to him. The suggestion of the crowd brings about his identity with God. The participation of the community can also take place in the following way. There is no apotheosis of the initiate, but the sacred action is recited, and then in the course of long periods of time, psychic change gradually occur in the individual participants. F. Magical procedures. A further form of transformation is achieved through a rite used directly for this purpose. Instead of the transformation experience coming to one through participation in the rite is used for the express purpose of effecting transformation. It thus becomes a sort of technique to which one submits oneself. For instance, a man is ill and consequently needs to be renewed. The renewal must happen to him from outside and not bring this about. He is pulled through a hole in the wall at the head of his sick bed, and now he is reborn, or he is given another name and thereby another soul. And then the demons no longer recognize him, or he has to pass through a symbolic death, or grotesquely enough, he is pulled through a leathern cow, which devours him, so to speak, in front and then expels him from behind, or he undergoes an ablution or baptismal bath and miraculously changes into a semi-divine being with new characteristics and an altered metaphysical destiny. So this stuff is very complicated. That's why I wanted to talk to you guys about some of the ideas that Jung mentions, because Jung is a very abstract writer, and a lot of his conceptions have been kind of dismissed in the universities for them being very mystical and esoteric in nature. But I do believe that he has a lot of good ideas, and it's hard to describe what was going on in his mind when he was talking about all of these different transformations, because as you can see, these type of subjective transformations are seen all across cultures, and for him to have known all of these different transformations, he would have had to study a lot of different cultures, right? So he understood a lot of old languages like I think Hebrew or something. All these different languages, all these he studied Joseph Campbell, a lot of different writers such as Friedrich Nietzsche, and to be able to understand these transformations and how they pertain to your life, um, I think the best way is through natural transformation. So this is the individuation process that Jung ta- um, talks mostly about in this book. So I'll discuss that right now. Natural transformation or individuation. As I have pointed out, this is a quote by Jung. As I have pointed out, in addition to the technical process of transformation, there are also natural transformations. All ideals of rebirth are found on this fact. Nature herself demands a death and rebirth. As the alchemist Democritus says, nature rejoices in nature. Nature subdues nature. Nature rules over nature. There are natural transformation processes which simply happen to us whether we like it or not, and whether we know it or not. These processes develop considerable psychic effects, which would be sufficient in themselves to make any thoughtful experience ask himself, what really happened to him? Which, uh, like the old man in our fairy tale, he too will draw mandalas and seek shelter in their protective circle. In the perplexity and anguish of his self chosen prison, which he had deemed a refuge, he is transformed into a being akin to the gods. Mandalas are birthplaces, vessels of birth. In the most literal sense, lotus flowers in which a Buddha comes to life. Sitting in the lotus seat, the yogi sees himself transfigured into an immortal. So what Jung is talking about is going through and trying to integrate your ego and the shadow. So as we saw in the model of the Jung psyche, um, what we're essentially trying to do is bring those two elements together and to try and form the self. So a process which we'll discuss later on in his last chapter is artistically doing this in a way where you spontaneously start painting an image of mandalas and trying to figure out what your unconscious is trying to depict to you, right? So we do have our right brain, which is responsible for our creative abstract ideas and how we pertain them to the our external world, and that has a lot to do with our feelings. And then we have our left brain, which is very knowledge based, based on language, that communicates to us as we know it through um, uh, reading, writing, all those type of structures. So pretty much when you dream, your right side of your brain is communicating to your left side, and your ego kind of disappears. So your unconscious is coming through your ego, or through your, it's becoming conscious to you, in a sense that you're not actually in control of what is going on in your dreams. So that is very scary, because where do these dreams come from? And what Jung is trying to discuss is that all these complexes come from the unconscious and a collective unconscious. So pretty much a collective dream per se. So I don't want to get too into it right now, because there's still some ideas I want to talk about. With that being said, I'll get into the next slide. All right. Pick your damn sacrifice and bear it nobly. Quote from Jordan Peterson again. And so obviously when we're talking about rebirth, we have to discuss, you know, the main symbol, Jesus. You know, he died on the cross, was resurrected, and was born again, and that's just a rebirth theme. It pertains to pretty much our highest ideal. We pretty much have to, in order to attain our highest ideal, or reach our highest ideal, we have to kill off the things that make us insufficient. And pretty much what Jordan Peterson is talking about when he says, pick your damn sacrifice and bear it nobly. We're all aware that life is existentially full of malevolence and tragedy, right? So malevolence runs down the middle of the human soul. It's in all of us. There's, as we discussed, there's a shadow side to the world, a chthonic side. And what we as individuals, in order to conduct ourselves in society as responsible individuals, is we have to take um, this malevolence and tragedy and bear it nobly, right? So I, I I'll give an example. You wake up in the morning and you decide not to get dressed and go brush your teeth and leave the house, um, because the world is corrupt and things aren't going well. But what Jordan Peterson is trying to say is to avoid going about the world in a nihilistic manner, and you should, like Jesus, pick up your cross, make sacrifices, and go about the world anyway, despite the tragedy of life. So in the next chapter, we talk about the psychology of the child archetype. Um, we have all observed a 70-year-old behaving like a child, throwing tantrums, or hiding from their caretakers. We have experienced the occasional urge to engage in impulsive shopping and our tendency to sulk and to expect others to console us. These are all experiences of the child archetype in us. So we usually associate qualities of innocence, impulsiveness, spontaneity, creativity, as well as those of independence, naivety, ignorance, stubbornness with our idea of a child. These qualities of the child archetype often manifest themselves in different ways for each of us. One of the first qualities that we associate with the idea of the child is innocence. The innocent aspect of the child archetype is naive as well as playful. Though those of us in whom this archetype of the child is prominent would find themselves to be generally easygoing, having a carefree approach and being able to trust others easily. Such childlike innocence is beautifully exemplified in characters like Peter Pan and Snow White. When the innocent child in us is heath- healthily integrated into the psyche, it enables us to nurture the innocent, the playful, lighthearted side in us, along with being able to carry out responsibilities of adulthood with relative ease and balance. However, at times when we feel overwhelmed with challenges in our lives, the innocent child might not feel prepared to face them. It discovers that world around us is not ideal, not fair, and contains imperfections at every stage. As this child's happy bubble breaks, it leads to feelings of despair and the child finds itself feeling overwhelmed. It is at such times when the shadow of the child archetype could come into play and the child begins to find comfort in retreating into fantasy. We find ourselves refusing to acknowledge our concerns or deny, and on a broader note, we refuse to grow up and take responsibility of the situation. Thus, the shadow side of the child is dominant in individuals who grow overly dependent on others to help them deal with their problems. So with this, I'll relate this to Peter Pan. I'm not sure if you guys know the story, but Peter Pan was a child that didn't want to grow up, and he would go to Neverland, and he was the king of Neverland, right? He was the kid that sat in his basement and ate Cheetos and played video games all day, right? But the reason he didn't want to contend with society in a way that was responsible was because the only other adult in his life was um, Captain Hook. And as you know, Captain Hook was a very traumatized person. You know, he kind of walked around kind of skeptical about everything. He was kind of scared because what had happened was the crocodile with the clock in his stomach uh, bit off his hand, and that's why he has his hook. And pretty much that is saying that time had a piece of him, right? And eventually it was gonna devour him, right? We all die at the end of our lives, and the reason Peter Pan didn't want to contend with being a responsible adult is because he didn't see Captain Hook as someone he wanted to be. I can see where he's coming from. You know, you don't adult life isn't great, but I think that's where the most transformation happens. Because if you're the king of Neverland, it really doesn't mean anything. Um, I forget the girl in the story, but pretty much because he didn't want to grow up, it disallowed him to have a proper relationship with a real feminine woman, right? So he had to contend with Tinkerbell, which is kind of like the fairy of porn, right? Uh, you guys get what I'm trying to say. Don't be a basement dweller. Go out into the world, contend with real things, take on responsibility. And that's kind of the main message I took from Carl Jung in this book, right? The idea that we as individuals have responsibilities. And I think people really want to hear that, you know, that yes, you can have that life that you've always wanted to have, right? I watch a lot of Jordan Peterson, and I don't want to say that these ideas are all mine, right? A lot of what Jordan Peterson talks about is developing these responsibilities and taking care of your life and getting your life in order. And that's the big theme in what Carl Jung, the collective unconscious, really tries to relate to us um, through our dreams and how we relate to the world through fairy tales and Disney movies, right? We all seen The Lion King, right? You guys know this image. It's an archetypal image, right? We have all of our potential at birth. We have potential. How are we to reach our fullest potential? We take on responsibility, right? So, at other times when the child is unwounded, probably stemming from a harsh environment or severely negative events, or the child is wounded, the child archetype becomes a source of strength for our psyche. That is grappling with the pain. Usually, popular fiction characters like Cinderella and Harry Potter depict the strength of the child archetype. Both of them were orphans and experienced a painful, difficult childhood. However, they succeeded in their quest of transitioning into adulthood. In the real world as well, we see such strength in individuals like Oprah Winfrey or Kaliki Koechlin, I don't really know who that is, who were sexually abused as children and are now actively involved in fighting for the cause. So yeah, this comes down to the idea of yes, life is tragic, but to be able to bear that pain, take it on, it really gives you a strength, and that's what transforms you into the highest ideal. So now I want to talk about this video. I want to show you guys this video of Pinocchio, from Pinocchio. This is a clip from Pleasure Island. So Pleasure Island is pretty much where Pinocchio goes when he doesn't want to, you know, he had responsibilities to go to school, but he gets um, tempted into to joining the circus or whatever as a puppet, right? So other people were pulling his strings, and I could see that relating to society, and where an individual goes out and instead of um, um, maintaining his responsibilities, he wants to be an actor and pretend like life is carefree and he has no responsibilities. And I just want to, as you guys watch this video, I want you guys to see the vandalism of the Mona Lisa and the different arts, and pretty much the last part where he throws a brick through the stained glass window. That's very symbolic in that as the as individuals who are kind of in this pleasure island, they kind of undermine art, and uh, it's being ignorant towards tradition and religion of the past. So that's why I suggest that you guys keep watching my lecture series, because we're gonna get into a lot of history, and um, being able to understand a lot of the conditions of the past will help us go forward in our present lives in a way that's not ignorant. And a lot of guys fall into this trap, right? They don't really understand um, why things are the way they are. And guys have to decide between, following along what friends do and doing the right thing, making themselves sufficient in society, making themselves known. So I'll play that video really quick.
Right here, boys, right here. Get your cake, pie, little pickles, and ice cream. Eat all you can. Be a glutton. Stuff yourselves. It's all free, boys. It's all free. Hurry, 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 hurry.
The Rough House, the Rough House. It's the roughest, toughest joint you ever seen. Come in and pick a fight, boys.
Oh, boy, a scrap. Come on, let's go in and poke somebody in the nose.
Why?
Ah, just for the fun of it.
Okay, Lampy.
The back to row, the back to row. Get your cigars, cigarettes, and chewing tobacco. Come in and smoke your heads off. There's nobody here to stop you.
Pinocchio! Pinocchio!
All right, so as you guys see, we have like Jiminy Cricket was kind of that little bug. He symbolized the conscious or our conscience. So the voice in our head that's telling us what's right and what's wrong. And Pinocchio is kind of distracted by all of these pleasures of the world, right? And he's not really listening to his conscience. And this idea of listening to your conscience is very relevant to this literature because that's essentially where the archetypes lie, right? Within the unconscious. You kind of get a voice in your head that tells you, yeah, maybe you shouldn't do that, and you kind of avoid it. And what these archetypes kind of help you do is kind of bring those collective ideas to the forefront where you're conscious of these ideas and how they pertain to society, so you don't find yourself trapped and not realizing like, hey, maybe this is my child, uh, the part of my child self that is being naive and not really taking on any responsibility, like this is a normal thing. I just have to develop myself in a way that is good, um, lean towards the positive aspects rather than the negative. But you do have to understand the negative. I think that's really important with understanding this type of literature because the shadow is pretty much the main theme of this book. And it's pretty scary to realize that us as humans have this evil side to us and this side to us that we don't want to see. But by being able to understand why we do the things that we do, we have to take a look at it, and it's where most of the good transformation takes place. So, in this next chapter, we talk about the phenomenology of the spirit in fairy tales. So, the spirit is an archetype and a functional complex, often personified and experienced as in living, analo- analogous to what the archaic mind felt to be an invisible, breath-like presence. Right, the pneuma. Remember, I talked about the pneuma when we watched the video of Disney Fantasia. This is what it's talking about. So, spirit, like God, denotes an object of psychic experience, which cannot be proved to exist in the external world and it cannot be understood rationally. This is its meaning if we use the word spirit in its best sense. If we are to do justice to the thing we call spirit, we should really speak of a higher conscience rather than of the unconscious. Right, so a lot of religions, and when you talk about like these yoga girls, um they talk about like a higher conscious, and I think a better way of understanding it is like our unconscious, right? Our collective unconscious, the collective dream that Jung is talking about, because that's where these kind of godlike imagos live. And this is where ideas come from and how society is structured. And you're not really conscious of how these ideas affect you, you know? And so I'll get into the archetype of the spirit. So the archetype of the spirit in the shape of a man is a hobgoblin or animal. Always appears in a situation where insight, understanding, good advice, determination, planning are needed but cannot be mustered on one's own resources. The archetype compensates this state of spiritual deficiency by contents designed to fill the gap. Jung was careful to distinguish between spirit as a psychological concept and its traditional use in religion. So I'm sorry if I'm stuttering and I'm not really articulating myself properly. This is kind of my first time doing these type of videos. But so from the psychological point of view, the phenomenon of the spirit, like every autonomous complex, appears as an intention of the unconscious superior to, or at least on a par with intentions of the ego. If we are to do justice to the essence of the thing we call spirit, we should really speak of a higher consciousness rather than an unconscious, of the unconscious. So the common modern idea of spirit ill accords with the Christian view, which regards it as the summum bonum, as God Himself. To be sure, there is also the idea of an evil spirit. But the modern idea cannot be equated with that either, since for us, spirit is not necessarily evil, we would have to call it morally indifferent or neutral. So, yeah, if you understand a lot of the mythologies of the past and the different fairy tales that come about history, and if you watch a lot of Disney movies, you can understand where this idea of spirit comes from, right? It's kind of like Simba being possessed by, um, you know, his wise, his So we have in the Lion King, Rafiki, or the shaman monkey, pretty much shows him in the reflection of a lake or a river, what he could be if he followed his father in his father's footsteps, right? So we can understand like where these archetypal images come from, and whether it be the Father in heaven, or your highest ideal being someone who conquers the world and goes and carries himself in a way that is noble, and sets his own highest ideal. He makes his own ideals. You guys can relate to that, because, well, when you watch Disney movies, you guys get the story. It just makes sense. Like, why is that? Why, like a Pinocchio, like walking around with strings? Like, it's really taken for granted in society, how much these the phenomenology of the spirit in fairy tales exists, right? So I will continue with the different archetypes, starting with the old man. All right, so the archetype of the wise old man first appears in the father, being a personification of meaning in its procreative sense. So the the sage archetype, called senex, or old man in Latin, is one of wisdom, knowledge, and power. It represents the innate spiritual aspect of our personality in the unconscious, and according to Carl Jung, appears in our lives through different symbols. It may take the form of people, dreams, insights, or our life's learning we pass on to others. So yeah, you guys can see Gandalf, you guys know Dumbledore in Harry Potter. These are old man archetypes present in almost every Disney movie or hero's journey story. So in literature, the sage often takes the form of a mentor or a teacher to the hero, playing a crucial role in the hero's journey. The sage archetype may be portrayed by a god or a goddess, a magician or wizard, or a philosopher or an advisor. So yeah, we saw this in the Lion King, Rafiki being the sage or the shaman, um, with his little fruits, and he's kind of portrayed as kind of a fool-like character, also, which we'll get to the next slide. The sage is usually depicted as a wise old man or an old crone with great foresight, who offers measures who offers measured advice and guidance to help the hero in his quest, and at the same time letting the hero choose his path towards destiny. The sage archetype has been described in various forms throughout literature across cultures. The sage archetype makes its presence felt in modern popular fiction as well. For instance, as Yoda from Star Wars, as the wizard Gandalf in The Lord of the Rings, and Dumbledore in Harry Potter. The sage's quest for truth. The sage is a seeker of truth, and this archetype operates from a fundamental principle that the truth will set you free. It is associated with attributes of self reflection and understanding that enlightens our path to individuation. It implies asking questions to self in order to reach the answers one seeks in life. Often, when we reflect inwardly and deeply, we are unable or able to generate insights, new perspectives, and actionable solutions. And it is the sage archetype that drives us towards such reflection. In the search for wisdom, the sage thus engages in meaningful introspection, which involves reflecting and looking inward by being aware and accepting one's thoughts, feelings, and actions without any judgment. So, such tendencies of the sage archetype make us associate it more often with its light characteristics and with an idea of illumination, right? The idea of enlightenment. However, the sage too has a shadow of its own that needs to be embraced. The shadow of any archetype contains its weaknesses, repressed desires, and unacceptable impulses. So, the sage's dark side. The shadow of the sage asserts itself by our tendencies to be crucial and dogmatic in our views of the world, as well as of our own selves. We can easily imagine the wise old man sometimes being too fixed or rigid about his ideas. Often when we reflect, we tend to be critical and make judgments about the thoughts, feelings, and actions of ourselves and others. We label them as good or bad, and or right or wrong. For instance, we might think, how can I be jealous? Jealousy is wrong. I should not feel this way. How can I be attracted to another person when I love my partner so much? This means I am a bad, sinful person, right? So sin meaning to miss the aim. It's an archery term, archery. These labels that we attach to the insights we derive while looking inward make us feel innocent or feel guilty and hurt. Such reflections then become unhelpful as they lead to unhealthy rumination. By making judgments about our thoughts, feelings, and actions that we do not like and by labeling them as bad or wrong, we are rejecting those aspects of our being which in actuality cannot be denied to oblivion. Such denial, through bringing temporary respite, becomes suppressed and gets integrated into the shadow. And our anxiety of running away from our shadow, that in fact lies within us, we end up perceiving our lives as a series of uncontrollable events we feel helpless in. For example, a person who thinks anger is a bad emotion will not acknowledge or express when he feels angry and is likely to blame his environment or people around him as being insensitive and imposing towards him. So pretty much the old man archetype is wisdom essentially. I think every individual can relate to some type of voice in their head that tells them that they should learn or they should take on this path to individuation, right? Like it's personified of it's a personification of meaning. So anything that has to do with responsibility, right? Has to do with this old man archetype. All right, so that's enough of that. We'll get into the trickster. The trickster or the riddler, the keeper of balance, he of the many faces who finds life in death, and who fears no evil, who walks through doors. So Jung studied a lot of alchemy throughout this book, right? So if you hear some references to alchemy, that's because Jung understood alchemy as um, coming before science. In so it was so science being that things can be measured. It's a structure for measurements, pretty much. That's what science is. So alchemy um, came before it, and it really took on a lot of archetypal ideas, such as there being certain elements such as fire, wind, fire. I'm not sure all of the elements, but these are the core elements of Earth. And pretty much in alchemy, um, so the trickster is an alchemist, a magician creating realities in the duality of time and illusion. The trickster deity tricks or breaks the rules of the gods or nature, right? Sometimes maliciously. For example, Loki in Thor, the Marvel series, but usually with ultimately positive effects. Often the rule breaking takes the form of tricks or thievery. Tricksters can be cunning or foolish or both. They are often very funny even when considered sacred or performing important cultural tasks. So if you guys know anything about DMT, uh, there's these trickster like characters that come up when you're in this trip. Um, I pretty much tell you like you know where all the things that you're not doing correctly, or it brings awareness to the parts of you that you fear, right? And it does it in a laughing manner, right? It's often laughing at you. And the idea with the trickster is it's also a archaic symbol of the savior, right? So we see that in Jesus Christ. Um, in many cultures, in Greek, Norse, or Slavic folktales, along with Native American First Nation lore, the trickster and the cultural hero are often combined, right? So, Jesus Christ. For example, in Greek mythology, the Titan Prometheus stole fire from the gods to give it to humans. He is more of a cultural hero than a trickster. However, in many Native American and First Nation mythologies, the coyote or raven steals fire from the gods, but they are more tricksters than cultural heroes. This is primarily because a coyote and raven are usually seen as jokesters and pranksters. The trickster is an example of a Jungian archetype. The fool survives in modern playing characters as the joker. In modern literature, the trickster survives as a character archetype, not necessarily supernatural or divine. So yeah, when you're trying to integrate this archetype um, into your conscience or conscious um, ego, you might want to start off with trying to find balance between good and evil, right? So going back to history, learning what it is that makes humans evil and our capacity towards evil. And then we can look at the good side and we can understand that yes, I'm going through life in a way that's kind of foolish. Every time you start something new, you become the fool, right? You can't really learn anything without becoming the fool. To start anything, like say you want to start singing, you're gonna sound pretty terrible. When you first start, you're gonna look like a fool, but eventually, um, this is where the savior aspect takes place because eventually you're going to be able to transform and um, be able to create and essentially transcend normality. So the last chapter of this book is called Conscious, Unconscious, and Individuation. So Jung pretty much discusses the individuation process in detail. Talking about alchemy, talking about all types of mythologies. He was very smart in with his understanding the mythologies of the past and religion and how they pertain to the conscience or the conscious, unconscious psyche model. So the individuation refers to the process through which a person achieves a sense of individuality separate from the identities of others and begins to consciously exist as a human in the world. So the purpose of the individuation process is to increase the individual's consciousness. With great consciousness, individuals can heal the splits in their mind between conscious and unconscious. bringing them into wholeness in their psyche. In the first half of life, we make our way through the world, doing our best to develop healthy egos. The first portion of life is mainly external, as we seek to make our basic needs met. To meet our basic needs. From Jung's outlook, the second part of life can represent a turning inward, toward a deeper part of ourselves. This inward turn starts the individuation process. So, prior to beginning the individuation process, we have certainty. Through the course of our development, we form a solid self-identity. We think we know who we are. But this self-identity is always one-sided. It's an illusion, or Maya, as the Buddhists call it. Because we are unconscious, we don't feel the inherent tension and opposites between the conscious self we know and the unconscious parts of ourselves. You're probably familiar with the Taoist symbol of the yin and yang. This ancient symbol represents a balance or harmony of opposites. Yang is the sunny light side, while yin represents the shadowy side. Instead of seeing yin and yang as opposing forces, the Chinese view them as complementary forces that interact within a greater whole, represented by the circle encompassing them. Consider how the values and worldviews of masculine and feminine principles can vary. The masculine seeks autonomy, the feminine seeks communion or relationship, right? So guys usually like things more than women, and women like people more than men. It's the scientific literature um, has proven that. So, can you imagine what it would be like to integrate both masculine and feminine principles within your mind, not favoring either perspective over the other? It's not easy, but this part of the goal of the individuation process. Um, Jung found that opposites create tension in the psyche. If we don't learn to address these tensions, denying the opposites instead, we repress or push the pressure out of our consciousness. But repressing doesn't eliminate the opposites or the tension itself. It only makes them more destructive in our psyche by strengthening our shadows, right? So repressing tension makes us one-sided, and it leads us to project our unconscious fantasies onto reality. When we deny these internal tensions, we enforce our delusions and self-deception. Besides the tension between masculine and feminine principles, here are two other common internal tensions: instincts and psyche. A key pair of opposites in Jung's work are instincts and psyche. The instincts are our biological roots, our id, as Sigmund Freud would say, our body. The psyche in Jung's conception is the totality of mental processes that include both conscious and unconscious forces. Anytime we try to favor psyche over instincts, mind over body, spirit over nature, or vice versa, we cut ourselves off or dissociate from a part of what we are. So, how do we proceed with our psychological development towards individuation? Jungian psychology offers two related methods: dream work and active imagination. So, Carl Jung was known as someone who was leaning towards the crazy side because he often had psychotic breaks, and he was on the verge of schizophrenia, right? He would have visions and do this dream work, as mentioned in his book, the Red Book, where he talked about all the different visions he had, right? He had like visions of like the devil talking to him, like very crazy stuff, But he was a psychiatrist, so he was still practicing and helping people that were crazy while he was essentially going crazy himself. Um, but that leads to the idea, like, how can one be crazy when he's still participating in the world in a normal manner. And that's where Jung is very significant, because he was able to document everything that was going on within his own mind, and like depict what was going on in the unconscious without, you know, going completely mad. Like he was pretty scared of it, right? He didn't want Sigmund Freud, calling him out on his craziness and be like, "Yo, I caught you. You're going completely insane, man. You need to, go to the mental hospital." But Jung talked about dream work, or he did a lot of dream work himself. So dreams, Jung found, are the gateway through which the unconscious communicates with our conscious mind. Our inner wise old man or woman, the self, knows what's best for us. So it's really scary stuff. It's like we might not, we definitely are not in control of what mostly happens to us, because there are these forces that we aren't aware of that are controlling how we perceive the world. It's very scary, I would say. So our wise old man, oh sorry, the self, however, cannot communicate in language. Instead, it uses symbols and images. Right, so that's our right brain. The self cannot communicate directly with our conscious mind. Instead, according to Jungian psychology, it sends us messages through our dreams. As Jungian analyst Mary Louise von Franz says in The Way of the Dream, the dreams are letters of the self that the self writes us every night. So Stevens confirms in Private Myths, Jung maintained that a crucial factor determining our conscious we are in whether we attend to our dreams and the degree to which this enables us to make what is unconscious conscious. By working with dreams, we create soul. We wake up to our total situation, become conscious, achieve wholeness. That's dream work. So I would recommend, maybe if you had a crazy dream that you don't really understand, maybe write it down. I wouldn't suggest making your own red book and completely going mad and talking to demons. But yeah, I've personally had a lot of success with interpreting my dreams as they come to me. It's very interesting stuff, and it really does pertain to real life. You have to understand that we're not as mechanic as you might think. The world is very strange. So the next method Jung talks about is active imagination. So Jung would literally, after talking to his crazy patients, be like, "Yo, I'm gonna try and summon the devil," and start um, uh, imagining what he had depicted in his dreams earlier, and yeah, it would happen, and he would completely like get or completely get dissolved in all of these vivid dream-like places, and he would write them down in his black books, pretty much the prequel to the Red Book, as draft copies, and it was pretty interesting stuff. I really do want to get into the Red Book later on in another episode, but it's pretty scary what he saw. So while in dreams, our dream ego interacts with the unconscious parts of our psyche. In active imagination, this interaction takes place while we're awake. Instead of going into a dream, we go into our imagination, allowing the images to arise from the unconscious and communicate with us. So if you're interested in pursuing the individuation process, I recommend Robert Johnson's Inner Work for practical instruction on dream work and active imagination, right? You don't want to be going crazy by yourself. You read that book. Refusing the call to individuate. Although Jungian psychology and the individuation process can liberate us, it's not a safe path. There's no safety once we leave the everyday world. Plus, to achieve success, we must strip away all of our false identities and our egos have invested in creating. Doing so triggers fear from our ego. That's why most people resist their call to adventure, and why, according to Jung, so few people individuate or achieve psychic wholeness. So Jung writes in The Secret to the Golden Flower, um, the way is not without danger. Everything good is costly, and the development of personality is one of the most costly of all things. But Jung believed it can lead us out of the hall of mirrors and return us to ourself. So the next part of this is pretty much the end of the book. Jung pretty much talked to this lady who was having problems integrating her full self or whatever, something to do with her mother or leaving her home country. And she starts this artistic process of like painting what her unconscious mind was trying to tell her. And it's very interesting. It comes down to this idea that creativity kind of comes from nowhere. It comes from forces outside of us. So she starts off with this painting of her stuck in some rocks, and throughout throughout the painting series, it kind of progresses into more beautiful art because she wasn't a a perfect painter, right? She started off as a fool. She wasn't the best painter. Um, Better than me, of course, but yeah, it's very interesting. We see like a lightning bolt kind of striking this ball, and Jung goes into a lot of detail of what these symbols mean in mythology, and it's very interesting. As I said, he studied alchemy and a bunch of mythology, astrology, theology, any ology, bro. Like he really understood what these dreams or paintings depicted, and he wrote it out in his book. So if you want to have a more um, in-depth understanding of what went on in these paintings, I suggest reading the last chapter of his book. And yeah, so it starts off here, and number 12 is kind of here. It's some type of archetypal number. We have the snake, right? The Eve snake, the temptress, the thing that brings about creation, but also can devour us, right? We confront chaos. We go and fight the dragon, as Jordan Peterson says. We try and bring about chaos. What is it that we are fighting? It's usually a dragon or a snake, right? Uh, as as monkeys, when we were in the jungles of Africa, bro, we were pretty much in trees. And what was the predator that was usually lurking in the trees and below and above us? It was usually snakes. So it's very interesting that these snake images are still present in mythology. So the next one, we have the snake again, and then we have more beautiful depicted mandalas. And as we continue, it gets more and more interesting, right? We have these beautiful painted images, just coming from the psyche. She's just spontaneously painting, and this could be a very useful task if you want to try and individuate yourself. See what your unconscious is trying to tell you. Kind of with each painting. I don't know, maybe she took about 2 weeks for each, or some I believe were even 10 years apart, and you could see the difference, right? So I believe this is when she left her hometown and went into her mother's homeland, and yeah, you can kind of see this individuation process really being depicted through art. And yeah, like these are really interesting, especially you see here. If you follow the story, or you have to read the literature of Jung to really understand. I don't think he breaks down the last images, but you know everything coming from this book is really a hypothesis, right? Nothing in it is final, in that he's proven, that this is the one process that will change. It's more of something that he experimented with. And I believe that you could get some really interesting insights through this process. I work a lot with animating and stuff, and it's really interesting while I'm reading Jung, right? I read a lot throughout the day, like not just Jung, like Friedrich Nietzsche and a whole bunch of different um, authors and scientists that had really amazing ideas about the conscious. And it's just interesting seeing how the different um, animations kind of form over time. If you're really into this stuff, you can really get a lot from it. So this is where the book ends, right? This is her last painting, right? The lotus flower, and as I said, the lotus um, the lotus flower is a symbol of creation. So it's pretty much that process of that phoenix transformation, right? You're being burnt, you die off in the ashes, and then a worm comes, and out of that worm, a new phoenix is born. So the energy which emanates from Vishnu's navel, from which the Lord Brahma is born, this energy of creation is not derived from Vishnu alone, but from the union of Vishnu and Lakshmi. Vishnu is also named as, I'm not going to pronounce that, Padmanabha, due to the lotus Padma, which springs from the navel, Nabhi. The lotus, the lotus in Lord Vishnu's hand symbolizes that he can endow the highest spiritual experience. So Jung really connects spirituality to psychology and to psychiatry, and it's really interesting that spirituality really can play a significant role in our lives. Um, and I would suggest after watching this video to start, um, really looking into where you are in your life. I would maybe do a self-authoring program. Write a paragraph of your past or a few paragraphs of your life story in essence, and then try and see where you write down uh, what you expect or where you expect to be in the next like year. Um, you know, Jordan Peterson has. I'll try and link that video or his program in the link in the description, but you can try and see yourself as more of a hero. And I think that idea is really powerful because if you see yourself as someone who is overcoming, you know, the tragedy and malevolence of the world for a bigger picture, right? The right side of the brain, the unconscious bigger picture that you're not conscious of. Um, you're kind of the meek. You want to understand all of the weapons that you're given at hand, right? You have the sword, and you want to keep it sheathed. You don't want to just let um, all of these thonic, um, these negative aspects of you evolve. And because you want to live a good life, you want to be someone that's positive, but at the same time, you want to understand that you are a dangerous force of nature, right? This stuff is nature. You came from nature. It's what we all came from. We are, in essence, natural, right? And what is nature? It's the process of selection. You don't want to be at the bottom of the dominance hierarchy and wonder why you can't, you know, uh, eat good food, and why you are low in serotonin, and why you can't find a good female to make a relationship with. You want to understand all of these different concepts because um, in life, there's things that you are not going to be aware of. There is chaos. And what is lurking in chaos is not, it's not, um, it's scary, but it's not something that you can't overcome. And I think Carl Jung, um, the archetypes of the collective unconscious, really uncover what is not known to you. You might know it, but you're not very conscious of it. So thank you for listening to my lecture. Hopefully in the next episode I'll be more articulate in my speech, try and not rely much on notes. I do read a lot, so every book I read, I'm gonna try and do a lecture series on it. And with that being said, um, you know, make sure you clean your room and you know, go out and fight that dragon. Easy.